My mom and dad secretly hired a private investigator to watch my boyfriend, but I discovered their plan early and created a setup that stunned everyone. Be me, 27-year-old web architect living in Boston. Grew up in the suburbs in a conservative and close-knit family. Tradition wasn't just a value. It was a damn rule book. Parents, both first-generation immigrants, always talked about carrying the torch. That meant sticking to our cultural roots, marrying within our faith, never making choices that would embarrass the family. My older sister Eliza followed the script perfectly. She married a man from our community, hosts all the holiday dinners, still calls our parents every day like clockwork. I've always been the quieter one, the easy child, the one who didn't stir the pot. Until I did. Met Natalie 2 years ago at a book signing in a tiny shop near Beacon Hill. She wasn't even supposed to be there. Her friend bailed last minute and she came anyway. We ended up sitting next to each other during the Q&A, started talking about the author's last novel. One conversation turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend brunch a few weeks later. We were inseparable. Natalie is sharp, grounded, compassionate, makes people instantly feel comfortable. She also happens to be from a completely different background. Different religion, different culture, different everything. I knew it would be a problem eventually. Just didn't realize how far my family would go to make it one. I didn't rush to introduce her. Waited 6 months. Not because I wasn't sure, because I already knew how they'd react. My mother greeted her with a tight smile, eyes that never softened. My father shook her hand like he was doing a business deal he didn't want to make. Eliza was the only one who genuinely tried. She asked questions, laughed with Natalie, even offered to meet for lunch sometime. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could get past the tension. That illusion didn't last long. A few weeks later, my father called out of the blue. Didn't ask how I was or how work was going, just got straight to it. Said he hoped I was just having fun and that I wasn't about to throw away everything we raised you to value. I told him I was serious. There was a pause, a deep sigh, then he hung up. No goodbye, just silence. Natalie never said a word against them. Not once. She kept showing up, being polite, making small talk when it was obvious they had no interest in getting to know her. She even brought over homemade cookies for my mother one time. My mom said thanks, then threw them out when she thought no one was looking. Natalie saw it. She didn't cry. She just smiled and said, "I'll try something else next time." That's who she is, always giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it. About 4 months ago, I started planning to propose. Didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Eliza. Not even my co-workers. Talked to my best friend. Bought a ring. Had dinner with Natalie's parents to ask for their blessing. They were ecstatic. Her mom cried. Her dad clapped me on the back and called me family already. I was nervous, but it felt right. I was finally building something on my own terms. Around that time, my family's behavior started shifting. Eliza stopped texting me about random things like she usually did. My dad got oddly quiet during our weekly Sunday calls. My mom started slipping in strange comments, like you think you know someone, but people hide things. Or don't be blind just because you want to believe something. None of it made sense at first. Then came the visit. 2 weeks before I planned to propose, I drove out to the suburbs for dinner. It was tense before I even walked through the door. Halfway through the meal, my father put down his fork, said they'd looked into Natalie, found concerning details. I asked what that meant. He refused to explain. Just said I should dig deeper before it's too late. My mother stared at her plate. Eliza wouldn't meet my eyes. After dinner, I cornered Eliza in the kitchen, pushed until she cracked. Turns out they hired a private investigator, not just a background check. An actual licensed professional to dig through Natalie's life. Eliza said she tried to talk them out of it, but they were convinced I was making a huge mistake. The investigator pulled up 3 things. Natalie had been engaged once before in her early 20s. She had some credit card debt she struggled to pay off during grad school, and a couple of her cousins had been involved in small legal issues years ago. That was it. Every single thing Natalie had already told me. I left that night without saying a word. Got in my car and just drove. Didn't answer their texts. Didn't pick up their calls. A few days later, my mother sent me 3 long paragraphs about how they were only trying to protect me. It didn't feel like protection. It felt like surveillance. like they'd rather destroy my relationship than accept someone they couldn't control. When I told Natalie, she sat still for a few minutes, then nodded. She said she wasn't shocked. She'd always felt like she was being watched. Like every word she said around them was being filed away. She asked if I still wanted to marry her. I didn't hesitate. I proposed that night, just us in the living room of our apartment. With the same playlist we played on our first date, she said yes before I finished the sentence. I haven't told my family, not because I'm ashamed, but because I'm not done. If they want to play detective, then I'm going to show them what it feels like to be investigated. I'm going to make them understand that trust isn't something you destroy and rebuild with a few apologies. They wanted secrets. Fine, I'll give them one, just not the one they expect. 1 week after I proposed to Natalie, I sent a group message to my parents and my sister. It was short. I told them Natalie and I were engaged, and we were planning a small engagement dinner with close friends. I also made it clear we wouldn't be doing a traditional religious ceremony. I didn't ask for approval. I just let them know. No one replied for 6 hours. Not even Eliza, who usually responds to everything within minutes. I kept checking my phone out of habit. Nothing. Just silence. It was like I dropped a bomb, and they were still figuring out how to respond. The first message came from my mother. 1 sentence. "This is a mistake, but it's not too late to change your mind." That was it. No congratulations. No questions. No curiosity. Just judgment. After everything they had already done behind my back, it still caught me off guard how cold she could be. My father didn't text. He called. When I picked up, he didn't even say hello. He got straight to it. Said I was turning my back on the family. I didn't argue. I told him what he did. Hiring a private investigator to dig into Natalie's life was invasive, manipulative, and something I couldn't forgive. He didn't deny it. He just said he was acting as a father. I told him if that's what fatherhood meant to him, then maybe it was better we kept some distance. He hung up. Later that night, Eliza messaged me privately. She said she didn't know what to say. That she liked Natalie, she really did. But she felt stuck. Our parents had made their expectations clear, and she didn't know how to be loyal to both sides. I told her she didn't have to choose a side. She just had to be honest. She didn't respond. After that, Natalie and I had already booked a small restaurant for an engagement dinner. Just our closest friends and her family. We were still finalizing the guest list. I had originally left a few spots open in case something changed with my family. But after that week, I made a decision. I told Natalie I wasn't inviting them. Not unless something changed drastically. She nodded and didn't ask questions. That's one thing about her. She lets people show who they are without trying to force anything. I sent another message to my family. This time I didn't leave things open-ended. I said that until they could respect my relationship and our boundaries. I would be taking some space. I didn't want updates, opinions, or advice. I just wanted peace. About 3 days after that message, Natalie noticed someone new at her gym. A man in his late 30s who signed up for a trial class, but didn't seem interested in actually working out. He made small talk during cool-downs, then started asking questions that didn't match the conversation. He asked if she lived alone, if she and her roommate had plans to get married. She didn't answer, and told the staff later that something felt off. They shrugged it off as someone being awkward, but it stuck with us. The next day, Natalie stopped by her usual bookstore near our apartment. A woman came up to her while she was browsing and asked if she used to go to a certain university. Natalie said yes, and the woman said they had a class together years ago. That part checked out. They chatted for a bit. Then the woman randomly brought up my name and asked how we met, how long we'd been together, what our plans were. The way she asked didn't sound casual. It sounded like she was collecting information. Natalie kept her answers short and left quickly. That night we started connecting the dots. These weren't just coincidences. Someone was still trying to gather details. Details we hadn't shared publicly, not even with most friends. It didn't feel like the original investigator. This was messier, more obvious. Either they hired someone new, or someone in my family was asking friends or acquaintances to run into Natalie and poke around. I called Eliza. I didn't accuse her of anything, but I told her what had been happening. She sounded genuinely shocked and said she didn't know anything about it. I believed her, but I also told her I was done sharing anything personal, unless I could trust that it would stay between us. She didn't argue. She just said, "Okay, Even with all this happening, Natalie never once asked me to cut my family off. She didn't push me. She said she would support whatever I needed to do, even if that meant giving them another chance, but I had already made up my mind. I called my parents and left a voicemail. I said they would not be invited to our wedding, unless they gave a full apology, not just to me but to Natalie, and promised to stop with the spying, the manipulation, and the control. The next day, I got an email from my mother. It was long, at least 5 paragraphs, but it wasn't an apology. It was a justification. She said Natalie was hiding things. She said it was their responsibility as parents to protect their children from being misled. She even mentioned how they'd heard things from concerned community members. No names, no proof, just vague warnings and gossip disguised as concern. I replied with one sentence. You can either be part of our future or live in the past without us. And then I blocked both of them. Phone, email, everything. Because if they wanted to play games with our lives, they weren't going to do it while still having access to mine. The private investigator my parents hired worked for a mid-sized firm based just outside the city. I got the name during a phone call with my sister, a name she let slip while trying to defend them. I pretended not to notice at the time. A few days later, I started digging. If they wanted to run background checks on my fiancé, I could do the same. The firm wasn't hard to find. I called using a fake name, told the receptionist I was interested in having someone looked into before a major investment. She explained their services like it was routine. Background checks, social media analysis, interviews with known associates. Then she mentioned almost offhandedly that they'd recently worked on a relationship case for concerned parents. That was all I needed to hear. I reached out to a lawyer friend from college to ask what I could and couldn't do. He made it clear digging into someone's past wasn't illegal, as long as you didn't use the information to harass or defame them. But if someone used personal information to threaten or manipulate another person, that was a different story. It wasn't enough to sue, but it was enough to raise eyebrows. That's when I told Natalie what I was planning next. I wasn't looking to ruin anyone. I just wanted to level the playing field. I said I wanted to run my own check. This time on my parents. She was hesitant at first. But when I explained what I was looking for, patterns, leverage, clarity, she gave me the green light. I started with public records. My father once co-owned a construction business that dissolved after a quiet settlement with a partner. No lawsuits? No headlines? But I found a financial agreement buried in county records that hinted at mismanagement of client funds. Nothing criminal. But it didn't reflect well on someone who constantly talks about integrity and accountability. My mother's history was even more interesting. When she was in her 20s, she had a 5-year gap in contact with her own family. I found an old newspaper clipping from a wedding announcement where her name was mentioned as a estranged daughter not in attendance. It was vague, but enough to show that her current moral high ground had some cracks. Then I called my cousin Victoria. She left the family years ago after marrying someone outside the culture. We hadn't spoken in a long time, but she picked up on the first ring. I told her what happened. She wasn't surprised. She said my parents pulled the same thing with her. Calls to her in-laws, sudden surprise visits, even questioning the legitimacy of her husband's job. Eventually she blocked them. She never looked back. That's when it all made sense. This wasn't about Natalie at all. It wasn't about religion or tradition or values. It was about control. My parents had always been able to push people around with guilt and silence. The moment someone resisted, they panicked. Natalie didn't beg for acceptance. She stayed firm, and that made them furious. One evening, Natalie handed me a letter she had written. It wasn't long, 2 pages. She wrote about what family meant to her. She wrote about respect, about how she wouldn't tolerate being treated like a threat. It wasn't angry. It wasn't soft either. It was clear and direct. She asked me to deliver it. The next day, I drove to my parents' house. My father opened the door, saw the envelope in my hand, and shook his head. He didn't speak. He just stepped back and closed the door. I left the letter on the doorstep and walked away. A week went by with no reply. Then Eliza called. She said our parents were disgusted by the letter, that they thought it was a power move, that Natalie was manipulating me. I didn't say much. I just listened. When she finished, I told her I hoped she saw the difference between speaking honestly and playing games. She didn't answer. After that, 3 days later, Natalie and I went to the courthouse. No photographers, no big moment. Just us, a witness, and a judge. We signed the papers. We held hands. We walked out married. We're still planning a ceremony with our friends later. Something small and personal. But we didn't want to wait anymore. We didn't need anyone's permission. We already had everything we needed. And now I'm not done. Because while they've been busy trying to tear Natalie down behind the scenes, I've been preparing something of my own. Not revenge, just truth. They like to control the narrative. But this time I'm writing it. My aunt, the only relative who still occasionally checks in, called midweek. She kept the conversation light, asked about work, made a few offhand comments about the weather. Then she paused and said a coworker had shown her a picture from a friend's dinner party. Natalie was in the background, smiling, wearing a ring. My aunt asked if there was news, her tone already hinting she knew the answer. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I changed the subject and got off the call 5 minutes later. The next morning, Eliza called. She wasn't calm. She went straight into questions about the photo and why she hadn't been told. I told her it was intentional. She said I was being cruel and selfish, but I'd excluded the one person who tried to stay neutral. I reminded her she wasn't neutral when she kept my parents spying a secret. She hung up without another word. That same afternoon, an email arrived from my mother. 5 long paragraphs about betrayal, shame, and how I was tearing the family apart. She called our marriage a mockery and said I had humiliated the entire family by skipping the traditions they built their life around. I didn't reply. 2 days later, Natalie received a letter at our apartment. No return address. It was typed with no signature. The wording was careful at first. Comments about family disappointment, concern. Then it turned ugly. It called her manipulative, accused her of robbing me of a real future, and said she had infected our bloodline. The paper shook slightly in her hands when she finished reading. We both knew who had sent it. Even if they didn't sign it, I ordered a security camera that night and mounted it outside our apartment door the next morning. I also filed a report with building management and asked if they'd noticed any strange visitors or entry log anomalies. They said no. They'd keep an eye out. The following day, I contacted the private investigator office again. This time, I asked whether they had shared our new address or relationship status with anyone beyond the original client. They refused to answer, citing client confidentiality. I didn't push. I already knew who the client was. That weekend, Natalie got a voicemail forwarded from her old landlord. It was a male voice, calm but invasive. The caller asked if she had always paid rent on time, whether she ever had overnight guests, and if she was still the same girl from years ago. It wasn't just creepy. It sounded familiar. The pacing, the phrasing. I replayed it a few times. It sounded like my father. I called my lawyer friend again and explained everything. She told me to start documenting everything. Every call, message, unexpected visitor. If it crossed into harassment and it was close, we'd need a record. 3 nights later, Natalie came home early. She looked pale. Someone had followed her from work to the apartment. Not close enough to confront, but enough to be noticed. She ducked into a coffee shop, waited 15 minutes, then circled back home. I took her to the police station. They were polite, but without proof, there wasn't much they could do. No name, no face, no crime. That night, I had a cease and desist letter drafted through my lawyer. It was clear and direct. It stated that any further surveillance, investigation, or indirect contact with Natalie would be considered harassment and pursued legally. We sent physical copies to both of my parents. My father replied 2 days later, not through a lawyer, but with an email. It had one sentence: "Legal threats against your own blood show how far you've fallen." There was no apology, just blame. I blocked him permanently. Phone, email, even work lines. I checked with HR to make sure no calls from unknown numbers got through. Eliza tried once more. She called from a different number. She said I was taking things too far. That family fights always blow over. That this was no different. I told her that when someone follows your wife home and sends anonymous letters, it stops being a family fight. She didn't have a response. We started reviewing our apartment for vulnerabilities. Natalie made a list. Windows that faced alleyways, shared access doors, storage units anyone could walk past. I scheduled a meeting with the building. to ask about mailroom access, staff protocols, and options for a private mailbox. We also got quotes for reinforced door locks and contacted a home security company for further upgrades. The week ended with another envelope. This one was thinner, smaller, no postage stamp. Hand-delivered. Inside was a photocopy of a hospital bill from when Natalie was 17. It listed an emergency room visit for a panic attack. The original bill was addressed to her childhood home. The only way someone could have accessed it legally was through a medical employee with ties to her family or mine. My uncle is a radiology tech at a private clinic. We haven't spoken in years, but I remembered during a family gathering once, him casually mentioning how easy it is to pull old records. If you know where to look. This time we're not just documenting, we're escalating. I've always been methodical, whether debugging code at work or unraveling systems. So when my family spent months invading Natalie's life, I knew exactly where to begin. I started pulling threads quietly, not for revenge, but to finally understand the people I'd once trusted. I contacted a friend from college who now works in records access. She'd helped people navigate public data before, mostly for legal reviews or background screenings. I told her I needed to search records connected to 3 names: my father, my mother, and my uncle. She didn't ask questions. By the next morning, she had something. My uncle, the one who worked in administration at a regional hospital, had a disciplinary note from 4 years ago. It wasn't publicized, but it was on his professional record. He had accessed patient files without clearance. During a policy audit, the hospital had flagged it as a privacy boundary breach, but no formal complaint was filed. So it stayed internal. I brought it up during a phone call with Eliza. I told her flat out that I had proof our uncle had crossed lines before. She got quiet, then asked if I was seriously thinking about reporting him. I told her I wasn't playing anymore. If Natalie's name or history showed up in any more documents we didn't authorize, I'd file a report with both the hospital's compliance board and the federal regulators. She didn't argue. That weekend, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months messaged me out of nowhere. Just one line: "Your dad never expected you to find out what else he's been hiding." No context. No follow-up. I replied once and the message went unread. I called my lawyer friend again. We started drafting a preservation of records notice, something that tells a company to freeze all internal data and logs connected to a subject before a potential investigation. We weren't sending it yet, but we were getting close. A few days later, I found something else. My father had been involved in a civil case nearly 10 years ago. It had been sealed, but the case index summary was still viewable. It listed the cause as emotional distress, breach of verbal contract. The claimant was a woman who had briefly worked at one of his small consulting firms. No charges, no payout listed, just a quiet case and a confidentiality clause. I didn't need more to know what that meant. The same man who lectured me about family honor, who had sent emails about shame and legacy, had paid to bury something. Maybe not criminal, but definitely personal. Natalie read the summaries without flinching. She didn't want to back off. She wanted to keep going. Her words were clear. "If they're going to keep watching us, we'll make sure they know we see them too." I made one final call to my uncle. I asked if he'd accessed Natalie's records. He laughed once, then went silent. When I mentioned the past reprimand, he hung up. 2 hours later, I got an email from an address that had no name attached to it. The subject line was blank. The message just said, "You need to stop digging." Eliza called again that evening. Her voice sounded tired, shaky. She said she couldn't carry the guilt anymore, and that watching our parents spiral had finally made her realize just how far they'd gone. Then slowly, she told me everything. My parents had threatened to cut her out of their will. If she didn't keep tabs on us, they'd asked her to visit our apartment under the excuse of checking in, then asked her to look through our mail, listen for details, even asked indirect questions to Natalie during casual coffee dates. She said she was done. I told her she could prove it. If she was serious, she needed to send them an email, clear and firm, that she would not be part of their obsession anymore. 30 minutes later, she forwarded me the message. It was short, just 4 lines. She told them she wouldn't be their eyes or ears, that she wanted no part in what they were doing. Their reply came within the hour. "You've made your choice." The shift was immediate. For the next few days, there were no strange messages, no packages, No suspicious faces around the building. Even the building staff said no one had tried to enter under our name. But it didn't feel over. A friend of mine who works in tech security reached out, unrelated to all this. During our chat, he mentioned off the record that someone had recently inquired about hiring a private security consultant for personal surveillance. He didn't say the name, but the context, the location, the phrasing, it was obvious who the client was. My father wasn't backing down. He was just changing tactics, and this time whatever was coming. It wasn't going to be subtle. The camera we installed outside our apartment finally picked up something unusual. Around 2 a.m., a man in a hoodie stood just outside our door for 5 minutes. He didn't knock, didn't move much, just stood there, head tilted slightly like he was listening. After 5 minutes, he walked away, slow and deliberate. Without looking back once, I pulled the clip and sent it to a friend who works in private security. He called it classic recon posture. The guy wasn't just loitering, he was trying to pick up sound patterns or figure out routines. The stillness, the position near the frame, the angle of his head. It all pointed to someone trained or coached. That same afternoon, I walked around the perimeter of our building. I checked near windows, utility panels, and the alley behind the lot. Near the street-facing side, just beneath our bedroom window, I found a small black object, tucked under a loose edge of siding. I took a picture, picked it up carefully with gloves, and brought it inside. It was a listening device, not high-end, but not something you'd find at a gas station either. We had hesitated to involve the police before, hoping it would all stop quietly. But after the voicemail threats, anonymous letters, and now physical surveillance equipment, we knew it was no longer just invasive, it was dangerous. We called the police, and this time they opened a case, they bagged the device for evidence, and said they would escalate it to their digital crimes division. They couldn't confirm who placed it yet, but they took it seriously. 2 days later, while cleaning out Natalie's car before taking it in for a scheduled service, I found something else. Attached magnetically to the rear wheel well was a GPS tracker. It was small, unbranded, and still blinking when I pulled it off. It hadn't been there the last time we checked her car. Whoever planted it had done so recently, and knew her schedule well enough to get close. We had downplayed it before, hoping it wouldn't escalate, but the GPS tracker crossed every line. This was no longer passive surveillance. It was targeted, personal, and dangerous. That same day, we handed everything to our lawyer and contacted the police. I packed everything. Security footage, photos of the device, the tracker itself, copies of the previous anonymous letters, and handed it all to our lawyer. She prepared a filing for a restraining order against my father. It listed harassment, targeted surveillance, and emotional distress, supported with evidence we had gathered over the past month. The paperwork was submitted to the court within 48 hours. A hearing date was set. My father was officially notified by legal courier. He didn't reach out directly. Instead, his lawyer contacted mine. The message was short and careful. "This is a misunderstanding. My client only wishes to ensure his son's well-being." No denial, no clarification, just damage control. Our lawyer responded with a formal warning. Any attempt to contact me or Natalie outside official legal proceedings would be treated as a direct violation of the protective order request. She reminded them that we had evidence, and it wasn't going away. Meanwhile, my mother, who had once sent long emails accusing me of betrayal, went completely silent. No response to the filing. No attempt to reach out. Eliza said she was waiting to see what happens next, which didn't surprise me. She'd always followed my father's lead. A few nights later, Eliza called again. She told me something I hadn't expected. She had once walked into our father's office to drop off tax documents and saw an open file on his desk. It was a physical folder, thick, organized. She glanced down and saw maps printed from Google Earth, copies of old family photos from Natalie's childhood, receipts, scribbled notes. She thought it was just research for a project, until she saw Natalie's name written in black marker on the cover. She hadn't known about the tracker, but she knew now that this wasn't just paranoia. We began preparing for court. Our lawyer walked us through every step. How to answer questions without giving them an opening. How to structure testimony around patterns of behavior, and what to expect from their side. Natalie practiced giving statements, staying calm, and reinforcing the paper trail we'd built. She didn't want to sit in that courtroom, but she didn't flinch either. Then Eliza forwarded a voicemail. It came from my father. Calm, slow, and too measured. He told her she was being foolish, that she was choosing liars over loyalty, and warned her not to get dragged into our mess. No threats. No shouting. Just something about the way he said it. Cold, confident, rehearsed. She forwarded it without comment. Now the line was drawn. This was no longer about a disagreement or disappointment. This wasn't about culture or tradition. It was about control, obsession. Watching, listening, tracking, all to keep power over a situation he could no longer manipulate. The court hearing is in 2 weeks. We'll be ready. The day of the court hearing arrived. Natalie and I got to the courthouse early, dressed simply, carrying a folder thick with documentation, photos, audio transcripts, receipts, printed screenshots, and statements from witnesses. Our lawyer met us at the entrance and went over the key points one last time. We didn't look around for my father, but when he entered the courtroom with his attorney, we saw him. He avoided eye contact, sat still, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the bench. Once things began, our lawyer started with a clear timeline of what had happened. The anonymous letter, the listening device we found under our window, the man caught on camera outside our door at 2 a.m, the GPS tracker pulled from under Natalie's car, the forwarded voicemail from my father. It wasn't just family tension. It was targeted, repeated surveillance with intent to intimidate. We submitted everything into evidence, printed photos of the listening device, a still image from the security footage, a digital copy of the GPS data log showing tracking dates and movement, a notarized statement from our building manager about the increase in unrecognized visitors, Eliza's written declaration confirming the physical file she saw in our father's office, including names, maps, schedules. My father's lawyer countered quickly. He argued that my father never physically installed any devices, that he only acted out of deep concern for his son's well-being, that he hired a third-party investigator without knowing they would go to such extremes. They painted a picture of an overprotective parent, misguided by worry, not malice. The judge asked him a single direct question: why a parent would approve the use of a GPS tracker to protect their son. My father answered without hesitation. He said it was necessary to observe the pattern of influence Natalie had over me. The judge raised an eyebrow and looked down to make a note. Eliza was next. She walked to the witness stand and answered every question directly. She explained how she stumbled upon the file in our father's home office, how it included printed images of Natalie's family, notes about her previous addresses, and even timelines that tracked her daily movements. She confirmed that she had not helped gather the data, only saw the contents. When asked why she had kept quiet, she admitted she had been pressured, then later cut off when she refused to participate further. My father's attorney tried to discredit her during cross-examination, calling her emotionally unstable and implying that her recent distancing from the family compromised her credibility. Eliza didn't waver. She stuck to her answers and corrected the record when the lawyer twisted details. Her testimony stood. Our lawyer brought in one final surprise witness, my friend from college who worked in public records. She testified about the disciplinary report linked to my uncle at the hospital, the one where he accessed files without patient authorization. When she explained the policy violation and the internal memo she had viewed, my father visibly shifted in his seat. His hands twitched slightly, then clenched in his lap. Midway through a heated exchange between both legal teams, the judge interrupted. He made it clear, one more verified incident, one more piece of unsolicited surveillance or contact, and this wouldn't remain a civil issue. He said criminal charges were well within reach based on current evidence. Then came the ruling. The court granted us a 1-year restraining order against my father. No contact, no physical proximity, no third-party communication. Any violation would go straight to enforcement. My mother never showed up. Not even a message. Not a glance through the courtroom door. Eliza later confirmed she had stayed home and hadn't commented on the hearing at all. Not before, not after. Outside the building, as everyone was gathering documents and clearing out, my father walked past us. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He leaned in slightly as he passed and said, "You're no son of mine." Then he kept walking, his lawyer close behind him. Natalie stood next to me. silent for a few seconds, then exhaled and said, "I feel like a weight's been lifted." We didn't go home after that. We went straight to the leasing office of our new apartment. The move had been planned quietly over the past 2 weeks. We picked a building in another part of the city, with stricter security, closed parking, and private mail handling. We gave no forwarding address, told our old building not to forward anything to anyone, even family. 2 days later, we packed the last few boxes. No neighbors asked questions. No one came knocking. We kept the blinds drawn and the security camera active until the final minute. Just before locking the door one last time, I grabbed a piece of printer paper from our desk, wrote a single word across it in thick Sharpie letters, taped it to the inside of the window by the front door. Enough. And then we left. A year passed. 1 full year since the restraining order was granted. No contact. No sightings. No anonymous notes. The silence had stretched so long that it started to feel normal. Then a notice arrived in the mail from the court. The order was set to expire in 30 days. We had to decide, renew it or let it end. Natalie and I sat down that night and talked it through. We went over everything since the day we moved. Nothing had happened. No cameras found. No strange cars parked outside. No weird packages or messages slipped under doors. The old apartment manager had confirmed no one had returned looking for us. The new address had stayed private. It had been quiet. 3 days later, the leasing office from our previous building called. A letter had been dropped off at the front desk. No postage. No return address. The receptionist opened it to check for a name and recognized ours. She scanned the first page and emailed it to us, asking if we wanted them to destroy it or forward it. The image came through a few minutes later. Handwritten. Just a single paragraph. No apology. No ownership. Only a statement. "You've punished us enough. It is time to return to the family." Signed only by my mother. No mention of my father. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a demand disguised as a plea. Natalie looked at the screen, walked over to the printer, and ripped the paper in half as it came out. She dropped it straight into the trash. "That woman never protected me," she said. "She let him come after us and watched it happen." We chose not to renew the restraining order, not as a sign of forgiveness, but because we no longer felt like we were waiting for something to happen. We weren't hiding anymore. We were done. A week later, Eliza sent a message. The first in months. She said our father had withdrawn almost entirely. He didn't talk about Natalie or me anymore. When relatives brought up my name, he acted like I didn't exist. He wasn't angry now, just quiet, bitter, isolated. She only visited occasionally, and even then their conversations were surface level. He trusted no one. Not even her. Another update came from my lawyer friend. She kept her ear to the ground in the hospital circuit. My uncle, the one who pulled Natalie's medical record, was no longer employed. It wasn't public. There was no lawsuit, no HR scandal, but he was quietly removed from staff. Gone. Someone must have pushed the right buttons behind the scenes. News of my father trickled in through mutual contacts. Former business partners, extended relatives, neighbors from the old community. He had become increasingly paranoid, stopped canceling events, stopped attending gatherings, spoke vaguely about betrayal, and said the world had changed too much. He locked down his home office, didn't answer the door unless he expected someone. Whatever grip he thought he had over me, it was gone. Natalie's life, meanwhile, was taking off. She launched a wellness program through the clinic where she worked. Within months, it was full. She hired 2 assistants. Clients started recommending her to their networks. She was finally doing work she loved, free of fear, free of being watched. We traveled. We explored new places without looking over our shoulders. We spent time with her family, who never once questioned our boundaries. We started hosting dinners, building new traditions with people who brought food, stories, and laughter. Instead of judgment and surveillance, I started therapy, quietly at first. Once a week, then twice. The sessions covered everything. Control, guilt, fear, and the strange responsibility I'd always felt toward a family that used love like a leash. Therapy helped me sort through it. Understand it. Leave it where it belonged. We changed our numbers permanently, set up P.O. boxes, switched our primary contact information to legal aliases for anything involving property, contracts, or financials. We took every step to remain legally untethered from anyone connected to them. One night we sat on our balcony with coffee. The city was quiet. Natalie asked, "Do you think they'll ever stop watching, even in their heads?" I told her I hope they do, but we already stopped caring. The next morning I opened the old box we kept hidden in our closet. Inside were all the files, evidence from the court case, photos of the GPS tracker, scans of every letter and voicemail we'd saved, legal drafts and timelines. I took the entire stack outside to a metal bin, poured lighter fluid on top, and lit a match. The flames rose fast. Papers curled and blackened. The voices, threats, and shadows we carried with us turned to ash in under 15 minutes. On the very last page, as it burned, I watched my own handwriting fade. One of my earliest notes from when I started documenting everything. It said, "They hired a private investigator." I dropped the match